day. It is good to be here with you again from the Executive Director's desk. Right, Kevin? The Executive Director's desk. And here we are in my office again. And I'm going to share a little bit about CHHSM, which stands for the Council on Health and Human Services for the United Church of Christ. Kenny Washington and myself were there last week, which would have been March 7th through the 11th, and we were in Louisville, Kentucky. And very honestly, for Kenny and myself, who is our Director of Services, we had very little time to ourselves, actually. They kept us going from breakfast at about 7:30, 8 o'clock through the evening at about 9 p.m., but it was a really beautiful gathering and an opportunity to be with about 400 other individuals that are a part of the Council on Health and Human Services with the United Church of Christ, that are out doing work similar to ours and yet very different work than ours. And for me, it was my very first opportunity to gather with this group. And so I made a lot of connections, had an opportunity to ask a lot of questions, had an opportunity to answer a lot of questions. And one of the things that Kenny and I did is we led a workshop, an hour-and-a-half workshop. One afternoon, the workshop was on dispelling the myths of homelessness and poverty, which was derailed because the slides that I lovingly prepared did not function, and we kind of went off the cuff. But I think it's probably the very best kind of a workshop where Kenny and I kind of got to go off the cuff. We had people ask questions, we answered their questions, we talked about homelessness and poverty, and the impacts of homelessness and poverty across our nation and really across our globe. I would say, and Kenny may differ on this, but the primary focus of this CHHSM gathering for Monday the board met, then we met Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then Friday most folks headed home after some morning gatherings. I would say the primary focus was really on racial equity, on race as it makes application to health and human services. And I, of course, felt like I was right in my element. It was something that I have been so invested in over the last number of years, and really invested in since my seminary years in my early 20s. And I found my spirit and my soul renewed during that time. And it was good to be away. It was good to be in Louisville. It was good to be among brothers and sisters and siblings who hold a similar viewpoint and similar passions around health and human services, and really are progressive in the way they approach life and the way they approach ministry. And actually, I was reminded of this when I happened to be in Walmart on Saturday here locally, and I was wearing my Tougaloo College sweatshirt that I purchased at Tougaloo a couple of years ago. And a young, older black man who was probably in his mid-80s, who was the individual who welcomed people in and out of Walmart and checked their slips, saw that Tougaloo sweatshirt and said, "So, sir, do you know what Tougaloo College is? Because it's probably not normal for a white man to be wearing it." And I said, "Yes, I do. It's a historical black university." And I said, "I've been involved in several gatherings there. Usually the first night at Tougaloo College in Jackson, Mississippi would be the night of the women of the movement, of the civil rights movement. It would be those who had participated, or the daughters or granddaughters of those in the movement who were still a part of the movement for equity and justice. And then the rest of the conference would commence at Jackson State University, which is, again, a historic black university. And I had an opportunity to attend that several years in a row, of course, until COVID. But one of the things that I found most beautiful about that moment with this man asking about the sweatshirt is I had an opportunity to connect the gathering in Louisville, to connect my own experiences in Mississippi and across the country. And of course, he shared, his name was Elmer. He said he was a graduate of Tougaloo University and graduated with a business degree and worked in that field for a long time, and then said in retirement he just couldn't stay retired, so now he's at Walmart. And we shared a few stories, and then he also shared some stories, and I stood there with him for about 45 minutes as he shared stories about his participation in the civil rights movement for racial equity and racial justice, and how he was a part of the sit-ins at cafes and restaurants throughout Mississippi and throughout Alabama, which connected me back to Chisholm. Is why I brought that up, is that it's kind of wherever you look and wherever you go, you have opportunities to connect and reflect, right? And one of the individuals that shared a presentation that I'd like to talk about today was Reverend Dr. Alton B. Pollard III, who actually is a seminary president of the seminary in Louisville, the Louisville Presbyterian Seminary. He spoke at Chisholm. And it was interesting because he also shared stories about his parents involved in the sit-ins, involved in the civil rights movement. And his parents decided at one point, though, they were part of the Great Migration during Jim Crow era, out of Mississippi, and they moved to Minneapolis. And of course, we know the stories that have been revolving in Minneapolis, right? And what was fascinating to me is they left the delta of Mississippi to go to Minneapolis. And as I made that connection and realized I had just read Pollard's book not too many months ago, I found it fascinating that he mentioned the exact same thing. He said, I grew up in Minneapolis. And he said, I grew up in a white neighborhood, and I went to a white school, and the teachers would let me go at different times during the day because it wasn't safe for him as a young black child and a young black teenager in Mississippi, in Minneapolis, in a white neighborhood. And that's a very different, a different twist, right? And we don't think of that. And the one thing I made that connection, and Dr. Alton Pollard said the same thing, is one of the largest disparity or income gaps in the nation was found there in St. Paul, Minneapolis, in the Twin Cities, between the white communities and the black communities. And so even in that moment, as Dr. Pollard got up to speak, I was like, this is going to be really interesting, because it's the intersections of my life, the intersection of his life, and the intersection of our lives, and even with this individual that I happened to meet at Walmart. So Pollard is the author of Mysticism and Social Change, is the title of the book, The Social Witness of Howard Thurman. Mysticism and Social Change, The Social Witness of Howard Thurman. I'd invite you to pick up the book. It's an amazing book that really connects to Howard Thurman, his work in the civil rights movement, his work for racial equity. And what I found fascinating again about this presentation from when Dr. Alton was how he encouraged us to hear the stories of the civil rights movement that his parents were involved in, to hear the stories of our black brothers and sisters, and make application to health and human services, to make application to the organizations that we serve, that we run. And I think that was a really important message for all of us. And then another speaker that I found incredibly interesting is a woman who had worked for the feds. She's a black woman. And she shared with us a different way of looking at racial equity and racial equality, because she said in the next few years, the majority minority are going to be the black community, and also individuals who are of mixed culture or mixed race, and said that they're going to be and need to be our middle class, because right now the middle class is made up of white individuals, and that's going to change because the majority of our population here are going to be black or be mixed race individuals, and they need to move into the middle class. And so she was looking at talking about race and equity and really doing that work of advocating in a different way, and talking about economics, and talking about privilege, and talking about opportunities for education, opportunities for employment, opportunities for a living wage, and moving this community that has had so few opportunities into the middle class. I would say overall, It was a really enriching, beautiful time to be together, because we had just come out of COVID. We all came out of this time of really the emphasis on Black Lives Matter and health disparities and racial disparities. And here we were together, 400 plus of us who work in the human services field, talking about sharing and discerning what is our role moving forward. How do we change the narrative? How do we change our society? How do we change our culture? Because we don't really want to go back to what was normal. We want to find a new normal where there is justice and equity, not just equality, for all individuals. And that's one of the slides that this speaker shared, is she shared a slide of equity and equality, and that equity is giving people the tools and what they need to succeed, be successful, and to thrive and not just survive. So how that's all going to play out at Back Bay Mission, I guess that's yet to be seen. Just having celebrated my year anniversary here, I've reflected and watched and listened and perceived, and now's the time to really kind of kick it into high gear, right? For this next year, and especially as we're approaching our 100-year anniversary. So thanks for joining me for this reflection. I know that was a really quick snippet. I think Kenny Washington is also going to share what he gleaned from this event. And both of us are going to glean something completely different. I know that it really spoke to my soul and to my heart. We actually ushered in a new president of CHSM that I think is going to be a real gift to CHSM. And so our previous president, executive director, is moving on to retirement. And there's a new director who will be setting his own vision and his own course as someone who has the skills necessary to kind of take us to that next place and that next space as an organization. So thank you for taking these few moments to listen, to reflect with me. A couple of thoughts for you to think about is where do you have opportunities to connect with individuals? To connect with individuals who are greeters at Walmart or speakers or others who are in your sphere of influence, to really share and to talk about things that really matter. So think about that as kind of your task after you hear this presentation and you kind of hear my gleanings is how can you be a part of the change? How can you be a part of the movement for equity and justice, whether that's with women or whether that's racial equity, or whether that's with the LGBTQIA community and equity, because we know that's a community that's also been suffering some attacks recently, or the community that lives in poverty. So wherever we need to find communities that need to be lifted up so they can be equal and equitable, I think is really, really important. So thanks for joining me. As always, we ask for your prayers and your support of Back Bay Mission, because without you, we couldn't do the work that we do here on the coast of Mississippi. Thank you. Be at peace.